Hello Year 10, this is the video / lesson that takes you through the medicine mock that you did over the first week we were in lockdown. So you should have had your mark emailed to you, and you should have had a feedback sheet which has got a sheet that helps you go through each question, and then a example answer sheet on the second page where I have answered each question. So what we're going to do with this video is I'm going to take you through each question. We're going to think about what the correct answer was, and we're going to think about what a good answer would look like, and that's the ones that I've written for you. You're then going to use that to think about, okay, so how do I do a good answer to questions 1, 2, 3, 4? So explain, describe, analyse sources. And then you're going to use that to complete your reflection sheet, and you're going to finish by giving yourself 3 targets. You're then going to choose one question to rewrite, but instead of rewriting a question that you already have attempted, I'm going to give you a new question, and you're going to have a go at doing that one, thinking about, right, now that I know how to do a good explain question, and that's my target, I'm going to do a new explain question to the best of my ability. And that way, you'll have learned what you can do well, and then you'll have given yourself something to do to improve, to get better at doing that type of question. So that's what the focus of this week is going to be about. I would spend a good hour, maybe even an hour and a half, doing this video plus the one question at the end, okay? First thing I want you to do is look at the reflection sheet. At the very top, you've got, kind of looks like this. You've got 2 boxes at the top there. I would like you please to write what was your end of year 10 target. It can be found on Go for Schools, and also it should be in your homework planner. If you get super stuck, like you literally can't find it anywhere, ping me a message on Instagram or Outlook. And then I want you to say what you got grade-wise. So, how do you know what grade you got for this paper? Write your total marks on that bit there. So let's say you got 34, no, 64. Write it there. Now, circle where that is. So let's say I said I got 34. I'm looking for 34. So that would be a grade 5. Can you see? Oh no, it wouldn't. It'd be a grade 6. 34 to 39. So I literally would just have got a grade 6 if I got 34 for this paper. So circle which one applies to you. So let's say you got 12. You'd be between 10 and 15 marks, so you'd have got a 2. Okay, if you want to be really specific, you can do plus or minus. So like if I got 34, I got a 6 minus because I just got a 6. Okay, once you've done that, think about what your target was. So let's say I got a 2 and my target is a 4. How many grades marks was I off getting a 4? So let's say I got 12, but I'm aiming for 22, then I'm 10 marks off getting a grade 4. Some of you may have got your target. So in that case, think about what your next grade up could be. You may be 2 grades between. So let's say you got a 2 and you're supposed to get a 4. What would it have taken to get a 3? So let's see if we can make baby steps. Okay, so you might want to pause the video so that you can fill in that, and then press play once you're ready, because I'm going to move on to the next bit. Next part of the reflection sheet then looks like this. It's a big table. What I've done is I've written the 6, but technically 7 questions out on the first column. Okay, so question 1 is a similarity and difference, and it was all about prevention. Question 2 was which source is most useful, and it was about public health. Question 3 was a describe question, and you had to describe Louis Pasteur's work. Question 4 is an explain, and you had to explain why patient care improved in the 20th century. Question 5 is our good old friendly outline question, and this time you're outlining what was causing illness. And then question 6A and B are all about World War I. 6A is to describe 2 features of treating the wounded, and 6B is always the same, explain why the environment was significant in how we treat wounded soldiers. So, just fill in what you got for each one. Okay, I do like out of. So question 1 is out of 4. So let's say you got 3 out of 4. Can you do 3 over 4? and so on. That should also be ongoing. If not, I'm just thinking now, if not, hopefully I'll have emailed it out to you. And then can you either write or do a colour code for how confident did you feel answering that question? So let's say with a similarity and difference where you get those three sources and you have to say which two are the same and which one is different, did you feel like, yeah, I was really confident in doing that? So you might give it like a green is good, or red would be, I really find that question really hard. Okay, if you haven't got colours, you can just write confident, not confident if you want. And then tell me why. Why is it that you like that type of question and you feel that you know how to answer it? And why do you struggle with it and you gave it a red because you don't feel confident? Don't worry about that teacher target box at the end there, okay? I will go through that with you as we go through each question, and you're going to use that to decide which target applies to you. So don't worry about that, just do those first three columns. And again, I pause the video and then press play when you're ready because I'll be moving on. Right, let's think about that teacher target, and then we're also going to be using the other side of the page, which is where I've written some example answers for us to highlight and label. So I would make sure I've got a highlighter in front of me. I think you would need at least 2 different colours because we're always highlighting 2 different things from the answers. If you haven't got a highlighter, you can underline with different colour pens or pencils, or crayons, whatever you've got in front of you. So make sure you've got everything you need. What we're going to do is I'm going to go through each of the questions on the PowerPoint, and then we're going to read through my example answer. We're going to highlight what we need to highlight. We're going to decide why these answers are good, or if they're okay, or if they're bad. And then you're going to decide think about your answer, which teacher target would apply to you. I've chosen 2. So you only have to decide one of those, okay? So one would be more for people that are struggling and didn't get a very high mark, and the other teacher target is for you, maybe you made it green and you felt confident doing the answer, so this is the next thing that you can do to turn your answer into an even higher grade, okay? So that's what the 2 targets kind of apply. So you highlight which one applies to you, and we'll do that after each question, okay? Right then, let's start with question 1. Question 1 is a similarity and difference question. You get given 3 sources. It will always start the same way, but remember you have to highlight the focus of the question because that will change. So use source A, B and C to identify 1 similarity and 1 difference in attempts to prevent illness and disease over time. So you should have highlighted or underlined the word prevent. Then I look at each source and I say, okay, so if I'm looking at which one shows similar methods of prevention and which one is a different one, I need to figure out what method of prevention is each source showing. So I've put them in the red boxes there. Source A, the method of prevention was religion, and you can use the example of they are praying, or you could say it looks like they're going on a pilgrimage, which is where they'd go on religious journeys to go pray for a certain place where a saint died or something. Also, I think it kind of looks like they might be flagellating themselves, which is where you whip yourself to kind of show how sorry you are and how serious you take asking for forgiveness. So either way, it's using religion. Source B, some of you got this wrong and you said bloodletting, I think. That's unfortunate. It's just the way the picture looks, isn't it? But it's Edward Jenner. Now that's a method of science because he's using a vaccination there, okay? So if you ever see a little boy and a man, go for Edward Jenner rather than with vaccine rather than bloodletting. That's my tip. Source C is a poster saying, cover your mouth when you sneeze and you cough. Very much what the message that we're getting today with corona, so it never changes. And that's all based on science, and it's the science of germs, which a lot of you managed to get. So you will only be given a mark if you are linking these 3 sources to the method of prevention. You will not get a mark if you say one is propaganda and one isn't. You will not get a mark if you say one is a successful method of treatment and one isn't. You've got to say the method of prevention. Now, if we've got religion, science and science, The two that obviously have a connection are B and C, because they're both using science to prevent illness. Evidence in B is vaccination, evidence in C is germs, and then A is the odd one out because it's religion, and there you can see them praying and so on. 4 marks. So think about which target applies to you. When you did question 1, when you did this question, did you not link each source to a method of prevention? Or was it that you didn't provide evidence from each one? So maybe you got the Edward a bit wrong, maybe you didn't mention germs for source C, and so on. So just highlight one of those for me, please. You might want to pause, and then I'm going to move on. Okay. So question 2 is which source is most useful. So you'll get given 2 sources and you have to say, analyse each one, and then you have to say which one is the best. They'll always start the same way, then you have to highlight the focus. Focus will be what the historian is using the sources to find out about. So which source is more reliable to a historian studying public health and hygiene over time? So both of these sources will be about public health, and you have to decide which source is the best at telling you what public health was like. So source D is from a proclamation made by Parliament in 1388 calling for rivers to be cleaned up. So already this is telling us, it's going to be telling us about public health in the medieval era because it's 1388. So is this going to give us enough information about what public health was like at this time? Dung, filth and garbage are thrown into the rivers, which makes the air infected and is the cause of many diseases. That's quite good. It tells us that public health was bad and gives us examples of why. It is proclaimed that the City of London and other cities and towns throughout England will stop this. They must remove waste or pay a fine of £20 to the King. So again, it's not only telling us what was wrong with public health, but it's also telling us that the government was kind of trying to improve it. And then source E is a cartoon showing the condition of the River Thames. It's titled The Silent Highwayman and was published in a satirical magazine called Punch in 1858. So 1858, that's kind of Industrial Revolution, so this is the industrial era. Is it giving us enough information about what public health was like? Well, it's showing us that river water is dirty and is leading to death. You could be a little bit sneaky and look in the background and see there's a bit of pollution going on as well. But it's not giving us any methods of improving, is it, like source D was? So already, just by looking at the content, I'm thinking D because it gives us more information. Have a look at the example answer that I've done on the sheet then. When we analyse a source, we're going to try and use the CAC method. Do you remember CAC? Content, what's good and bad. Attribution, that's the bit at the bottom that says where it comes from and the date. Good and bad. And then a conclusion. Now, because we are going to do a conclusion at the end where we say which source is the best, for each source I reckon you just need to do content attribution, and then kind of do a general conclusion at the end. So that saves us a little bit of time. So get yourself 2 colours at least. I mean 3 for the conclusion if you've got it, but the content and attribution is the most important bit. Do a little colour key like I've done at the top there. Let's read my analysis of source D. I've already highlighted where I've talked about the good and bad things of the content, good and bad things of attribution, and then I want you to do source E, and then I've done the conclusion at the bottom there. Okay. So here's my CAC paragraph analysing the first source. Source D tells us that dirty water was a major problem with public health in the medieval era, as it says there is a, quote, garbage thrown in the river. It also gives us an example of something the government was doing to try to improve health and hygiene, quote, they must remove waste or pay a fine. So those are, the magic number is 2. I picked 2 things that the source told us about public health. That's the strength, and then the weakness would be what is missing from the source, wouldn't it? So I said, however, the source doesn't tell us if this fine was effective in improving the conditions of the river. So I've said it's all very well to tell us the method that they're using to try and improve it, but they haven't actually said if that method was successful. So I've got content good, content bad. Attribution then. I need to find something good and bad about the attribution. The source comes from a proclamation by Parliament. This is useful to the historian because it's an official document from the time that shows a real law that was put in place. Strength. The source was made in 1388, which shows the historian what public health was like in the medieval era, but no other time period. Weakness. So I've said that it comes from a proclamation by Parliament is good, and the fact that it only comes from the medieval era is bad, because the source is public health and hygiene over time. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to read out source E then. You highlight where I've talked about content, strength and weakness, and you highlight if I've talked about attribution, strength and weakness. Source E shows us again that dirty river water is causing public health problems. In this case, death. It also shows a polluted London in the background, which is another public health issue. However, the source does not show us how the water is leading to death. The source was made in 1858, which shows the historian public health concerns from the industrial era. The source comes from a satirical magazine. This means it will be exaggerated for comedic purpose. However, the cartoon will reflect the concerns of the time. So have I done a strength and weakness from the attribution and the strength and weakness from the content? And then you do a conclusion where you say which source is the best and you give what's the magic number, 2 reasons why. To conclude, I believe source D is the most reliable to a historian because it gives a problem and a solution to public health issues of the medieval era. It is also an official document with no other purpose than to inform the public. So what makes this a top band? Why would I get 6 out of 6 for this? Well, I have analysed both sources equally. I have made a decision as to which one is the best. That's the basics. I have used the content and I've given 2 pieces of information from each source, and I've said what's missing, so I've given a strength and a weakness, and I've linked all of that to the topic of the question, which is public health. I have picked a strength and weakness from each attribution, and I've said why those things are good and bad. And finally, I've given 2 reasons in my conclusion, one to do with the content of source D, and one to do with the attribution of the source, thereby giving a varied range of reasons. So that's what makes this a top band answer. So think about which of these applies to you when you had a go at doing this source analysis. Did you hardly ever mention public health, and therefore to talk about what information public health each source gives us is your target? Or were you more lacking in explaining why things are good and bad? So did you say like, it was made at the time, but didn't really say what time and why that's good or bad? So highlight which target applies to you. Question 3 will always be a describe question. Really nice, easy questions, describe questions. They'll always start with describe, and then you highlight what you need to describe. Magic number is 2, so I would expect 2 paragraphs describing 2 particular things. That's 2 out of your 5 marks if you do it right. You get your 3rd mark for using key terms, your 4th mark for using detailed facts like names and dates, and your 5th mark if you use context to also describe. Now I would assume that you could pick 2 things about Louis Pasteur, and I would assume that you would be using key words like cures and science and stuff like that. So let's think about highlighting the top 2 things that make this a good answer. Am I talking about context? So am I talking about what people believed, what people knew, what had happened before Louis Pasteur, and have I used detailed facts? Now, because context is hard, I've actually done that for you, and I've done 1 detailed fact. So you highlight the context, like I've done, but then I want you to go off and look for the detailed facts. You can do this while I'm reading through the answer. So when we think about Louis Pasteur, obviously the obvious thing we think about is pasteurisation and how he proved the germ theory. It's a little bit harder to think about the second example, which is why my second paragraph is smaller than the first one. Does that mean I wouldn't get 5 marks? No, it doesn't, because I'm going to be doing all the 5 things that I need to be able to do. Okay, so my first thing that I would describe about his work. Louis Pasteur was a French chemist who proved the germ theory that fellow scientists such as John Snow had always pushed but never managed to prove. Actually, all of that could be context if you're being really picky, because John Snow came before him. During the industrial era, scientific thinking was becoming more known, but people still did not believe in germs because they couldn't see them. Context. What did Pasteur do? Pasteur proved not only that germs existed but could be killed. This was done by experimenting with the heating of liquids. Pasteur was asked to stop wine from going off whilst keeping its taste. He discovered that boiling liquids to 55 degrees killed the bacteria in the liquid that was causing it to go bad, whilst still making it safe to drink. This would later lead to pasteurisation, where milk is boiled to keep it safe. So you could highlight the whole first bit as context, and then you pick out where I'm using detailed facts. So this is a quite good description because I've got key terms, detailed facts and context, and the thing I'm describing is that he proved the germ theory. What's the other thing that he did then? Pasteur also worked on developing vaccines. He experimented on animals to develop a vaccine for rabies. Due to his work in the lab, he was able to mass produce vaccines which made them more widely available. Highlight if I'm using detailed facts here. This is my little bit of context. At this time, only one vaccine was widely available to patients, smallpox. Pasteur made it possible for new types of vaccines to be created. So it's not a massive paragraph, but have I got context? Yes. Have I got detailed facts? Yes. I mean, there's not a lot I can say about him developing vaccines. There's no point in waffling because, I want to move on to the next question. Okay, so this is a good answer because I've described two things. I've used detailed facts, context, and I've used key terms. So which teacher target applied to you when you had a go at doing a new Pasteur? Most of you managed to do the germ theory. I don't know if you quite described how he proved the germ theory that well. Some of you managed to think about vaccines, but most of you didn't think about that one. So, were you somebody who messed up information and therefore you need to work on actually giving the correct information about whatever you're describing, or did you nail that and you're kind of looking to move on a little bit? So be specific about what he discovered, like give specific examples. So when I said proved pasteurisation, I used the examples of wine and milk. When I said vaccines, I used the example of rabies, and that smallpox came before. So are you being specific enough? Highlight which target applies to you. Okay, question 4. By the way, you can do this in chunks. You don't have to do this whole thing in one big go because this video is already 20 minutes. So feel free to pause, go have a cup of tea, or do the rest tomorrow or something like that. Right, question 4 will always be an explain question. When you have an explain question, what should you use to structure your answer? The explain chain. I hope that you all said in your heads, if not out loud, to freak everybody at home, including your pets. So, it will always start with explain. It will either ask you to explain why something happened or why something or someone was important. So please highlight what it wants you to explain. Explain why patient care improved in Britain in the 20th century. So that means you are only giving reasons why patient care, so hospitals, improved in the 1900s. So I don't care about medieval, I don't care about the Industrial Revolution, I care about the 1900s. What is the magic number? 2. So you should be giving me at least 2 reasons why patient care improved in the 1900s, using the explain chain for each. Now the explain chain you can break into 2 things, can't you? The things that we have to do, which are the first 3 links, and the last 2 links are the things that we can do to add detail. So in one colour we're going to highlight the first 3, which is re-give the reason, describe the reason, explain the reason, and then in the other colour, which I've chosen green, but you can choose any one, we're going to do the last 2 links, which is context, so what was going on at the time, and long-term impact. Did it have a impact in the future? Did something happen after that made it happen or important? So I've given 2 reasons. I've written 2 paragraphs. I've done the first one for you just to help you out, so you can highlight as we go, and then I'm going to read the second paragraph and you're going to again highlight that one yourself. Okay, right, so the first 3 links in the chain are pretty much most of my paragraph. So here's me giving the reason, describing the reason using detailed facts, and explaining why that improved patient care. The main reason why patient care improved in Britain in the 20th century is because it became accessible to everyone. Everybody could get patient care in the 1900s. Here's me describing. This was due to the creation of the NHS in 1948. Detailed fact, which meant that hospitals and the care they provided was free to all citizens. It was funded by taxes and included prescriptions and hospital treatment. That's me describing, giving examples. Why is this going to improve patient care? This improved patient care because it meant that everybody could receive the same level of care regardless of wealth and status. For example, people who had never been able to afford to buy glasses or go to the dentist could now have access to that type of care. It also improved care because the aim was to help patients from cradle to the grave, which meant patients were cared for from the moment they were born until they died. So I've given quite a few reasons there. That's a good idea, is to explain, with more than one reason. So I've said, my reason is that it was accessible to everybody. Here are my examples. It was free, it was tax funded, you could get glasses, you could go to the dentist. And then I've given a couple of reasons why that's important. And then I was running out of time and I couldn't really think of many things for context and long-term impact. So I've just done it in a sentence, but sometimes that's all you can do and that's better than nothing and it could get you the top marks. So I put, for context, before this, very few hospitals offered any free care, and that meant that most working class people could not afford it. So I could have added a little sentence thinking about it there, saying this makes the 20th century important because it was the first time that everybody was getting free patient care. So I could have kind of said it like that, but I've used context. I didn't really want to use long-term impact because I felt like I'd just be repeating I'd just be saying we still have it today. So, but whatever. So I kind of just left it there. Okay, I'm going to read through the next one. Can you highlight in one colour when I give the reason, describe the reason, explain how it improved patient care? And then in another colour, if I use context or long-term impact to explain why it improved patient care. So another reason why patient care improved in the 20th century is that the standard of hospitals had improved. Reason given. Describe the reason. This involved building new hospitals with a ward, not war, with a ward layout, had plenty of space, high levels of cleanliness. Technology in these hospitals was also up to date, for example, heart monitoring machines. So there's me describing, giving examples. How is this going to improve patient care? This helped improve the standard of care as patients would be less likely to recover, more likely, that should say, would be more likely to recover in clean hospitals where they can be constantly monitored. So, you guys talked a lot about Florence Nightingale. Now, you can only talk about Florence Nightingale for this particular question if you're talking about context, if you're talking about what's happened before, because the date is the 20th century for the focus of this question. So some of you wrote big paragraphs on how she improved patient care, but that was in the 1800s, that was in the 19th century. So we are being influenced by her in the 20th century, but that can't be your reason. So instead, I've got her in context. I've got her saying how she influenced this. So this is an advancement on the Pavilion principle and training of Florence Nightingale in the century before. This helps improve care as it shows that hospitals, doctors and nurses are constantly adapting and improving their care to help patients. So I've got a little bit of context, a little bit of long-term impact there. So those should have been your two reasons. A common mistake, like I said, was to say that Florence Nightingale's work was the only reason. Some of you didn't even mention the NHS. If you get given a question that says patient care in the 20th century, it is the NHS. Okay, so which target applies to you when you had a go at doing this question? Did you actually not give reasons that involved patient care? Did you not talk about hospitals or wards or nursing or anything like that? Did you go maybe more towards cure, like medicines that were used? Because that's not really care, is it? That's cure. Or did you do the right examples, but you need to work on explaining in more detail? So you could explain how your example improved patient care by doing things like using context. So highlight which target applies to you. Pause the video if you need to, because I'm going to move on. Question 5 is an outline question. We all know how to do an outline question because we've practiced it loads. The way I'm going to break down outline questions for you to highlight is, are you given an example? So, sorry, this one was outlining how changes in causes of illness was changing over time. So So were you giving me examples of what was causing illness? And then were you explaining how they changed? Because if you're outlining, it's all about giving examples and then telling me how they're changing over time. So remember, we break it into 3 time periods: medieval, middle, 20th century. The middle can be early modern or industrial. We usually go for industrial. For each time period, we give, what's the magic number? 2 examples. And then we should be talking and comparing time periods and saying how they changed. And then it's good to do a conclusion at the end that says which time period or which was the biggest moment of change and why. So I've done the first one for you. For my medieval paragraph, I've highlighted where I've given an example of a cause of illness, and then where I've explained how that caused illness. And then in bold, I've put where I'm talking about things changed. Okay. Yeah, I think I've done that right. Okay, so in the medieval era, people had not made the connection between dirt and disease. As a result, the most common cause of illness was dirty living conditions. Sorry, I should have highlighted dirty living conditions. I've missed that one out. Notice how I give a bit of context before. I've picked that trick up from you guys, marking your work. I like it when you guys start with a bit of, oh, this is what people believed or were doing at the time, and then here's my example. This involved people putting waste into the river water, waste into the streets, and poor housing. So there are my examples. This caused illness because people did not understand that germs lived in the dirt and that infections could also be caused by the dirt. This was because people believed that illness was either God's punishment or miasma, bad air. So I'm constantly using context, I'm constantly using detailed facts. Another cause of illness during the medieval era was warfare. This was a very bloody time, and there were many key battles such as Hastings in 1066 or Agincourt in 1415, where men of all classes were expected to fight. Again, context, detailed facts. Common weapons of the time were swords, axes and arrows, which caused various horrific injuries. Due to the lack of scientific knowledge, many soldiers would become ill from dirt getting into their wound or from poor hygiene in the camps, which led to illnesses such as dysentery and cholera. So I've given 2 examples and I've explained how they caused illness. I can't talk about how illnesses have changed over time yet because it's the first time period. Right, you highlight the industrial era for me then. First of all, highlight, I should be giving 2 examples of what's causing illness. In the industrial era, scientific thinking was starting to take off, but was having little impact on causes of illness for the poor. So a bit of context there, that's the trick I pinched from you guys. The biggest cause of illness, like the medieval era, so I'm saying, oh, it was similar to medieval, was poor living conditions. But this was mainly due to mass population and poverty. So my reason is poor living conditions. That is the same as when I said dirty living conditions for medieval era. And I've mentioned that that's similar because I'm comparing. But I've also said it's different because in medieval era it was because they didn't know any better. In the industrial era it's because loads of people are moving to towns and cities. During the Industrial Revolution, people moved to towns and cities to work in the factories. This resulted in slum housing being built to fit as many workers into houses as possible. This caused illness as the houses were cramped, dirty and shared toilets. All of this allowed illnesses such as typhoid and cholera to spread quickly. Another key cause of illness was the working conditions at this time. There was no health and safety regulations and work was dangerous, such as coal mining, working with heavy machinery or chemicals. This led to injuries, e.g. losing a limb in a factory machine, cancers and specific illnesses from specific jobs, such as women in factories would get phossy jaw from the chemicals they used to make matches. So when I'm giving my reasons and explaining how they lead to illness, I'm constantly thinking to myself, am I using facts and key terms? And then I do a little sentence at the end where I'm starting to compare time periods. Although living conditions are still leading to illnesses at this time, new machinery and higher pressure to work are leading to more illnesses. So I'm mentioning a similarity but also a difference from medieval to industrial. 20th century. In the 20th century, a lot of progress had been made to improve living conditions, and people were aware of germs and how they could cause illness. Context, trick I picked from you guys. So this was no longer a major cause of illness. So notice how, even in my first sentence, I'm comparing the time periods. I'm saying, oh, living conditions aren't a problem anymore. Instead, lifestyle choices were causing people to become ill. This involved new technology such as televisions and computers causing illnesses to do with people's eyes or weight due to lack of exercise. Fast foods created a fatty, sugar-filled diet that caused illnesses such as diabetes and heart problems. War was still a major cause of illness, particularly as there were 2 major world wars in the 20th century. So I've given living conditions, lifestyle choices, food and war. So I've kind of given 3 sneaky examples there. And again, a little sentence at the end where I'm comparing to the previous time periods. These were different from medieval wars in the way that they were fought and the weapons used. In World War I, most soldiers got diseases from the trenches they lived and fought in. Dirty water, poor diet and rats led to things such as trench foot and lice. Weaponry such as machine guns, gas and bombs would not only cause bigger injuries than ever seen before, but also psychological damage, shell shock amongst soldiers. So I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to say that wars was a big cause of illness. Well, that's very similar to medieval, but also it's different because different technology, different illnesses, different conditions. So instead of like an axe wound, we've got shell shock. So notice how, and I don't mind where you're doing it, I am constantly comparing time periods. Even if there's something similar, I'm going to say it's similar. If there's something different, I'm going to say it's different. I haven't waited until my conclusion to do that. I have done that constantly throughout. And then in my conclusion, I'm going to talk about the biggest moment of change. The biggest change in causes of illness over time was the move from a lack of knowledge creating poor living conditions to a much better understanding of causes, but that people made choices that affected their health, such as drinking too much alcohol, eating the wrong diet, or not getting enough exercise. It is interesting that warfare continued to cause illness over time, but changed as the way of fighting wars adapted. So notice, I'm constantly saying, this is the pattern of change. Sometimes things change, sometimes they don't. So they change because we understand what causes illness, but then we make poor choices. Wars, there are always wars, but the way they fought changed. That's what makes this a top band answer. Not only do I give 2 specific examples for each time period, I am constantly saying these examples are similar to one another or they're different for this reason. So think about which one applies to the one that you did. Were you actually just not hitting the basics and you actually need to give me 2 solid examples of causes? Or did you do that and you're now needing to think about how you can talk about change and how things stay the same or changed? Okay, so highlight which one applies to you. We've only got 2 more to go. Okay, question 6A, like I said, is a describe 2 ways of treating the wounded on the Western Front. So think about World War I. They've been really nice to you here. The magic number is 2, but they've just said it there. It's the same as a describe question. You're doing the same 5 things. It's just it's worth 8 marks this time. So am I giving 2 examples? Am I using key terms? Am I using detailed facts? And am I providing context? So get yourself 1 colour for context, 1 colour for detailed facts. I've done the first one for you and I've done context for the second one for you. My top tip, like the outline question, is to always start with context, then give your example. So when it says features of treating the wounded, features is a really vague way of putting it. Kind of think of it as them saying, if you were to put all the ways they treated the wounded into themes, groups, what would you do? What groups would you put them into? So I was thinking, like, you know that mind map that we did where we said surgery was something that they were using, or technology, or getting people, like they had a system of getting people from the trenches to get the right treatment. A lot of you just went triage. A lot of you just went shell shock. Try and put them into themes, and then you've got loads of examples that you can use to describe and flesh out that paragraph rather than just say, they use triage, here is a sentence on triage, and how am I supposed to get 8 marks for that? So my two examples I used was getting soldiers away from the front line quickly, and then my second one was surgery, because I can give loads of examples of them doing each of those things. Okay, so if I've chosen to say they're trying to get people out of the trenches quickly, what's the context behind that? So that's the bit in purple. I've said many soldiers on the Western Front were injured charging through no man's land, either by machine gun fire or heavy artillery shelling. Getting to the injured soldier was incredibly dangerous due to sniper fire and giant craters. As a result, retrieval of the wounded was done at night. So here's me giving the reason. This meant a key feature of treating the wounded on the Western Front was speed. So speed, this whole paragraph is going to be about getting people off the battlefield quickly. So I've provided context as to why they needed to do that. Now I need to give plenty of examples of them doing it, using as many key terms and detailed facts as I can. This involved stretcher bearers. I should have highlighted that in yellow. That's a key term. This involved stretcher bearers collecting the wounded soldier and taking them to an aid post close to their trench, where they would receive immediate but basic treatment, for example, bandaging the wound and administering pain relief. The next place a wounded soldier would be taken to was a dressing station, where wounds would be inspected. If the wound was serious, they would be sent to the casualty clearing station. It was here where triage would take place. The wounded soldier would be put into one of three groups in order to receive the treatment they needed as quickly as possible. The three groups were immediate treatment, for example, surgery, non-immediate treatment, something that can be waited to be treated later, and no treatment possible, e.g. make them comfortable and prepare them for death. There were also base hospitals located behind the trenches where wounds and more advanced operating theatres offered long-term treatment and recuperation. I'm so sorry, but there's so many mistakes in this video. So instead of just saying triage is in there, but basically I've said there was loads of different places that you could take a soldier where they would be judged to see which place they should go to next to receive the care that they needed. And that way I'm using lots of detailed facts like aid post, dressing station, casualty clearing station, triage, base hospital, stretcher bearers, and I'm able to use loads of examples. Those of you that just did triage, you're not wrong, it's just you're never going to get top marks because you can't describe triage in such a detailed way that you'll get A marks. I hope that makes sense. So put things into themes instead of just giving the example. So my next theme was surgery. So if I'm being very clever about this and I want to get top marks, I need to provide context first, and then I need to give all the different examples of surgery. If you want to leave context out and just give all the examples, that's fine, but I've highlighted the context bit there for you. Can you also highlight the detailed facts? So another feature of treating wounds on the Western Front was surgery. This was due to advancements in warfare and weaponry, leading to new and horrific wounds. For example, machine gun fire created multiple bullet wounds, and shelling led to extreme shrapnel damage to body and face. So that's why surgery was a feature. Here's me giving examples. So advancements in surgery was made due to the portable X-ray machine developed by Marie Curie, which meant that surgeons could locate multiple bullets with more accuracy. A magnet was also developed by Harvey Cushing that meant retrieving bullets from the brain was less intrusive. Harold Gillies led the way in plastic surgery, using skin grafts and bits of bone to reconstruct wounded soldiers' faces. And finally, surgery was made safer by advancements in storing and providing blood to wounded soldiers. This was done by working out the correct blood type to give the patients and being able to store blood for longer using refrigerators. So that's easy. I was able to use loads of detailed facts because of all the people that helped develop surgery. So like I said, don't just do a paragraph on triage, a paragraph on the brain magnet, for example. Do a paragraph on treating people quickly and do a paragraph on surgery, and then you can give me so many more examples. And that's why this would be an 8 out of 8 answer. Ooh, so, sorry, think about, I can't go back, but think about which one you're highlighting from the target sheet on your question 6A. Because I think I've forgotten to put it on these two answers. So which of those targets applies to you? Okay, let's look at 6B, which will kind of never change. It will always be the same. So what I would recommend, if we're being cheeky, is to write the perfect answer, memorise it, and do it that way. The perfect answer is how you do an explain question. You use the explain chain. to give me how many reasons? At least 2. So again, I've given 2 reasons. I've done a conclusion this time, and I have highlighted the first one for you. So I've done the first 3 links in the chain, give the reason, describe the reason, explain the reason. Last 2 links in the chain, use context and long-term impact. We're thinking about why the environment of the Western Front was important in changing the way that we treat illnesses. Now, a common error that most of you do is you focus on the word environment. I really wish they would word that question differently, but they probably won't, so we need to get used to it. Environment, yes, it does mean you can talk about the trenches, but if the trenches aren't going to influence the way we treat illness and disease, then don't mention it that much, because all it did was cause illness. It didn't necessarily influence how we treated it, did it? So I would get into the habit of doing like your describe question, but adding explanations as to why it was important. So put things into themes. So the environment of the Western Front could be that there was new weapons, and therefore they had to, and people were getting horrific injuries, so they had to develop plastic surgery. The environment could be that no man's land was a really dangerous place, so they had to develop quick ways of treating wounds in order to deal with that environment. You could say it's a dirty environment, so they had to develop new ways of treating infections, but they didn't really come up with anything that new, so that would be quite a hard paragraph to write. And you could say that the environment was a place where lots of people were trying to come up with new technology and use portable technology quickly, and that's when you could talk about the blood refrigerator and the portable x-ray machine and things like that. So try and think about putting things into themes. I've chosen to kind of do the environment was causing psychological trauma because of how loud and everything and intense it was, so that's going to lead to better ways of treating mental illness. And I've gone for you have to treat people quickly, so triage is the other one I'm going to use. So I've done the first one for you, and then I'm going to read through the second one, and then I'm going to tell you my conclusion. Can you highlight where appropriate, please? We're nearly there. Whew. Right, the environment of the Western Front was significant in bringing change in the way we treat illness and disease in the 20th century because they began dealing with non-physical wounds. There's me giving the reason. I have to then describe them doing that. This involved treating shell shock through therapy where patients talked about their experiences. I now need to say why that's important. This was significant because soldiers were getting treatment even after they had returned from fighting. Now I need to say, is it important because of what was happening at the time, and is it important because it had a long-term impact? At this time, people did not really understand about PTSD, so giving soldiers the chance to talk about their experiences led to a greater understanding. This is also significant because it was one of the first times in Britain that the mental effects of war were being treated seriously. So the context is it's the first time they're taking it seriously. Does this have a long-term impact? This led to more research into treating mental health issues such as psychotherapy, significant as it helped to further treat and understand mental health issues. So it's important because it was the first time they were taking it seriously, and it's important because it helps us understand mental health issues in the future. So that's why that one's a good one to choose. Okay, so I'm talking about triage next. I need to give the reason, describe the reason, explain the reason in one colour, and then I need to use context, what's going on at the time, and does it have a long-term impact, also say why it's important. So you highlight where you think I've done that in the 2 colours. Oh, I haven't done that in a full sentence. So I would do as a full sentence, another reason why the environment of the Western Front was significant is because they used the triage system. This involved deciding what type of treatment the patient needed, for example critical and need treating straight away, can wait to be treated, or make comfortable as they can't be treated. That's me giving the reason, describing the reason, now I need to explain the reason. This was significant because it meant patients got the treatment they needed when they needed it. Have I then done the last 2 links, context, long-term impact? During World War I there were a record number of wounded, so they needed to come up with a quicker method of treating patients. This made the environment significant as it forced doctors to come up with new and more effective ways of treating wounds. So there's context. This method of treatment is still used today by emergency services when they have mass casualties. So it's important because it also had a long-term impact. And then for the conclusion, you kind of want to summarise what you're saying without repeating yourself. So again, I put things into themes, I think about long-term impacts, I think about context. So to conclude, the environment of the Western Front was significant in influencing 20th century methods of treating wounds and disease, as the mass casualties, living conditions and psychological effects of the Western Front forced doctors and surgeons to think of faster methods of treating soldiers. So that's me saying triage without repeating myself. It also led to breakthroughs in treating mental wounds due to mass cases of shell shock. So again, that's me saying my first point without repeating myself. And finally, it had a significant long-term effect, as triage and psychotherapy are still methods of treatment used today. So I used the theme of long-term impacts. I said both of these things are the effects are being felt in a positive way today. So I hope that makes sense. This is a top-band answer because I give 2 clear reasons. I describe using detailed facts, I use context to say why they're important, I use long-term impact to say why they're important, and I put things into themes in my conclusion in order to summarise my ideas without repeating myself. So look at that final bit of that table. Which target applies to you when you had a go at doing this answer? And again, nice trick. Revise, write a perfect answer, get it marked by me, go away and revise it, and then just regurgitate it in the exam. Okay, the last thing you're going to do is on that reflection sheet, there's a little box at the bottom saying, what are my next steps? How am I going to improve my mark? Or if I did really well in the mark, how am I going to maintain that standard? So you should all have highlighted for each question 1 target. Which question did you feel least confident on, or which 3 questions did you feel least confident on? Did you make red? I would put your target for each of those in there. So let's say for question 2, you didn't actually say why things were good or bad. That was your target. So for 1, you would put always say why things are good and bad when analysing a source. Maybe for the outline question, you're not saying why things change and stay the same. So for 2, you might say, in an outline question, always say why things change or stay the same. So pick your top 3 targets and pop them into that box there. And that's the thing I want you to use now to improve in the next task. So finally, you are going to choose which question you want to work on. So it could be the question that you got the least marks on. It could be the question where you could potentially gain the most marks so that you could jump a grade or 2. Or it could be the question that you're really thinking, oh gosh, I really don't know how to do this question and I need to know how to get better at doing it. Don't pick a question that you are like, oh, I nailed that one, because what's the point? You're never going to improve on it. So I've left out question 1 because that's far too easy. So question 2 is a source, which source is most useful question. And this one's to do with treating illness. Question 3 is to describe John Snow. Question 4 is to explain why Florence Nightingale was important. Question 5 is outlining prevention over time. And question 6A never changes. So again, do you want to have another go at doing the World War I describe question, because maybe you really bombed on it and you're thinking, actually, I could really nail that one now. So they're different from the ones that you did in the mock exam, so you can't copy what you've done in the mock exam and you can't copy my example answers, but you can use them to help you do a different answer. I also want you to pick one that relates to your target. So if one of your targets is I need to analyse sources better, maybe go for question 2. If one of your targets is I need to do the outline question better, maybe go for question 5. I would like you, please, to either I think it's probably just better if you type it up and email it to me, or if you do it on a piece of paper, take a picture and email it to me. I'm not going to do it on forms because it gets a bit too complicated then. So if you can just email me your answer, please, by Friday, that would be amazing, and then I can tell you what mark you got, and then you can see if you got better, and you can see if you managed to get up a grade, or maybe even 2, depending on how many marks you end up gaining. Okay, so just choose one of those questions, please, to rewrite using the targets that you just wrote down in your reflection sheet. Please put everything into folders, the reflection sheet and all of that. It's really important, so keep it safe, ideally in your medicine folder if you've got it with you. Thank you very much for listening. Wow, 55 minutes. I hope you listened to that in bits and not all in one go. Thanks, Year 10.